The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble courtyard of Avalon Palace as Princess Catherine adjusted her emerald silk dress and took a deep breath. Today marked the annual Children's Charity Gala, an event that had become increasingly important to her since becoming a mother herself. In her arms, she held her 18-month-old son, Prince Louis, whose bright blue eyes sparkled with curiosity as he took in the bustling preparations around them. The palace staff moved with practiced efficiency, arranging flowers, positioning cameras, and ensuring every detail met the exacting standards expected of a royal event. Catherine had specifically requested that this year's gala focus on early childhood development. A cause close to her heart since Louis's birth had opened her eyes to the challenges many families faced in providing proper care for their children. Queen consort Camilla emerged from the palace's main entrance, her silver hair perfectly styled and wearing a navy blue ensemble that commanded respect. At 68, she had grown into her role as the kingdom's second highest-ranking royal woman, though her relationship with Catherine remained complex. The two women had maintained a cordial but somewhat distant relationship since Catherine's marriage to Prince William 5 years earlier. "Catherine, darling," Camilla called out as she approached, her voice carrying the authority that came with her position. "I see you've brought little Louis along today. How wonderful." Catherine smiled warmly, though she noticed something in Camilla's tone that made her slightly uneasy. "Yes, I thought it would be perfect for him to see the children who will benefit from today's fundraising. He's been so well behaved lately." As if on cue, Louis gurgled happily and reached out toward the colorful banners hanging nearby. His chubby little hands grasped at the air, and his infectious giggle drew smiles from the nearby staff members who couldn't help but be charmed by the young prince. The event coordinator, Mrs. Pemberton, hurried over with her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. She had been organizing royal events for over 15 years and prided herself on anticipating every possible scenario. "Your Royal Highnesses, we're ready to begin the processional. The photographers are in position, and the charity representatives are eagerly waiting to meet you both." Catherine nodded and adjusted Louis in her arms, making sure he was comfortable for what would likely be a long day of public appearances. She had learned to balance her maternal instincts with her royal duties, though it remained a constant challenge. Louis seemed to sense the importance of the occasion and settled contentedly against his mother's shoulder. The first hour of the event proceeded smoothly. Catherine and Camilla moved through the crowd together, speaking with donors, charity workers, and families who had benefited from the Royal Foundation's work. Louis proved to be an excellent ambassador, charming everyone he met with his bright smile and animated babbling. However, as they approached the main pavilion where the formal presentations would take place, Catherine noticed that Camilla seemed increasingly focused on Louis. The queen consort kept glancing at the baby with an intensity that made Catherine unconsciously tighten her hold on her son. "He's certainly the star of the show today," Camilla observed, her eyes never leaving Louis's face. "Perhaps it would be more appropriate if I carried him during the formal ceremony. After all, as queen consort, I should be the one presenting the royal family to the distinguished guests." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine at the suggestion. While she understood the complex protocols that governed royal appearances, the thought of handing over her baby to anyone, even Camilla, felt wrong on a fundamental level. "Oh, that's very kind of you to offer, but Louis is quite comfortable with me, and I think the change might upset him." The tension between the two women was subtle but unmistakable to those who knew them well. Several members of the Royal Protection Detail had noticed the exchange and began positioning themselves more strategically around the small group. Commander Harrison, the head of Royal Security, had served the family for over 20 years and had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations might escalate. He moved closer to Catherine and Louis, ostensibly to check on their security arrangements, but actually positioning himself to intervene if necessary. "Besides," Catherine continued, trying to keep her voice light and diplomatic, "the whole point of today's event is to highlight the importance of maternal bonds and early childhood attachment. I think it sends a powerful message when people see a mother holding her own child." Camilla's smile became somewhat strained at this response. "Of course, dear, but we must also consider the broader implications of royal protocol. The photographs from today will be seen around the world, and it's important that they convey the proper hierarchy within the family." Several nearby guests had begun to notice the subtle tension between the two royal women. Lord Ashworth, a longtime family friend and major charity donor, found himself in the uncomfortable position of witnessing what appeared to be a developing disagreement between two of the kingdom's most prominent figures. Lady Margaret Sinclair, Catherine's longtime friend and occasional lady-in-waiting, instinctively moved closer to provide moral support. She had observed Camilla's behavior at previous events, and had always felt that the queen consort harbored some resentment toward Catherine's natural popularity and grace. The formal ceremony was scheduled to begin in just 15 minutes, and Mrs. Pemberton was growing increasingly anxious about the apparent delay. She had worked too hard to ensure this event ran smoothly, to allow any personal disagreements to disrupt the carefully planned schedule. "Your Royal Highnesses," she interjected diplomatically, "perhaps we should move toward the presentation platform? The children's choir is ready to perform, and the charity representatives are eager to begin." Catherine gratefully seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "Yes, of course. Louis loves music, so I'm sure he'll enjoy the choir performance." As they began walking toward the pavilion, Camilla continued to press her point. "Catherine, I really do think it would be best if I took Louis for the formal photographs. It's not about personal preference. It's about maintaining the dignity and proper order of these occasions." The suggestion had evolved into something that sounded more like a directive, and Catherine felt her maternal instincts kick into high gear. She had always been diplomatic in her dealings with Camilla, but when it came to her child, she was prepared to be much more assertive. "I appreciate your concern for protocol," Catherine replied, her voice carrying a subtle but unmistakable firmness. "But as Louis's mother, I believe I'm the best judge of what's appropriate for him today." Commander Harrison had been monitoring the conversation with growing concern. His training had taught him to recognize the early warning signs of conflicts that could escalate into more serious situations. While this appeared to be a simple disagreement about childcare arrangements, he knew that royal family disputes could quickly spiral out of control if not handled properly. The crowd of guests and media representatives had begun to notice that something was happening between the two women. Cameras started turning in their direction, and several reporters began positioning themselves to get better views of what was clearly becoming a tense moment. Young Louis, blissfully unaware of the adult drama swirling around him, continued to smile and reach out toward the colorful decorations. His innocent joy provided a stark contrast to the mounting tension between his mother and step-grandmother. As they reached the edge of the presentation area, Camilla made her move. With a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she stepped directly in front of Catherine and extended her arms toward Louis. "Come now, let Grandmama have a turn with you, little prince." The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Catherine found herself facing a direct challenge to her authority as a mother, disguised as a reasonable request from a senior family member. The entire success of the charity event suddenly seemed less important than protecting her right to care for her own child as she saw fit. The royal protection officers had moved into a loose formation around the group, not quite ready to intervene, but clearly prepared to act if the situation required it. Commander Harrison made a subtle hand signal to his team, indicating that they should be ready for any eventuality. Catherine looked into Camilla's eyes and saw something that troubled her deeply. This wasn't simply about protocol or tradition. There was something more personal, and perhaps more troubling, driving the queen consort's insistence on taking Louis. "I think Louis is perfectly happy where he is," Catherine said firmly, taking a small step backward to create some distance between herself and Camilla's outstretched arms. The refusal was polite but unmistakable, and for a brief moment, the carefully maintained facade of royal harmony cracked just enough to reveal the underlying tensions that had been building for months. In that instant, as cameras clicked and guests whispered among themselves, it became clear that this seemingly simple charity event was about to become something much more significant. The relationship between Catherine and Camilla, which had always been complex, was about to be tested in a very public and potentially damaging way. Louis continued to smile and babble happily, completely unaware that he had become the center of a royal drama that would soon capture the attention of the entire kingdom and beyond. His innocent presence served as both the catalyst for the conflict and a reminder of what was truly at stake in this battle of wills between two strong-willed women who each believed they knew what was best for the royal family. The morning sun continued to shine brightly over Avalon Palace, but the atmosphere in the charity event pavilion had become charged with intention that threatened to overshadow everything the day was meant to accomplish. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly erupted as Camilla took another step forward, her extended arms now reaching directly toward Prince Louis. Catherine instinctively pulled her son closer to her chest, her maternal protective instincts overriding years of diplomatic training and royal protocol. "Camilla, please," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying unmistakable steel. This isn't the time or place for this discussion. But the queen consort seemed determined to press her point. "Catherine, you're being unreasonable. I've raised 5 children of my own, and I certainly know how to handle a baby properly. This is about showing proper respect for the hierarchy of this family." The words stung because Catherine knew they were partly aimed at undermining her confidence as a mother. Despite her royal title and public composure, she was still relatively new to parenthood and sometimes felt uncertain about her decisions. However, those insecurities vanished completely when she felt her child was threatened in any way. Commander Harrison had seen enough. His years of experience told him that this situation was rapidly moving beyond a simple family disagreement into something that could become a serious security incident. Royal family disputes had a way of attracting unwanted attention and creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those with less than noble intentions. He stepped forward with the practiced smoothness of a man accustomed to managing delicate situations. "Your Royal Highnesses, perhaps we should move this conversation to a more private setting? The guests and media are beginning to take notice." His intervention was perfectly timed and diplomatically phrased, but both women were too focused on their standoff to pay him much attention. The gathered crowd had indeed begun to notice that something unusual was happening. Several photographers had started positioning themselves for better angles, and the whispered conversations among the guests were growing louder. Mrs. Pemberton clutched her clipboard tighter and glanced nervously at her watch. The charity presentation was supposed to begin in just 10 minutes, and she could see that the children's choir was getting restless. Some of the younger performers were starting to fidget in their matching blue uniforms, and their director was shooting increasingly desperate looks in her direction. Lady Margaret Sinclair moved closer to Catherine's side, offering silent moral support while trying to appear casual about it. She had known Catherine since their university days and could read her friend's body language better than anyone. The slight tremor in Catherine's hands and the protective way she held Louis told her that this situation was affecting Catherine much more deeply than she was letting on. "Perhaps," Lady Margaret suggested diplomatically, "we could arrange for both your Royal Highnesses to be photographed with Prince Louis at different points during the ceremony. That way everyone gets their moment, and the photographers have more variety for their coverage." It was a reasonable compromise, but Camilla seemed unwilling to back down from her position. "This isn't about photographs, Margaret. This is about understanding proper protocol and showing appropriate respect for senior members of the royal family." The word senior hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine understood perfectly well that Camilla was asserting her position in the family hierarchy, using Louis as a way to demonstrate who held ultimate authority in these situations. Prince Louis, still blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding him, had begun to get fussy. The tension in his mother's body was affecting him, and he started to whimper softly. Catherine automatically began the gentle swaying motion that usually calmed him, but her attention remained focused on Camilla. "I think Louis needs his mother right now," Catherine said firmly, using her son's discomfort as additional justification for maintaining her position. "He's starting to get upset, and a change of hands would only make things worse." Lord Ashworth, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing discomfort, decided to attempt his own intervention. As a family friend and significant donor to the charity, he felt he had enough standing to speak up without causing offense. "Ladies, perhaps we're all losing sight of what's truly important here," he said in his most diplomatic tone. "This wonderful event is about helping children in need, and I'm sure that's what everyone wants to focus on." His words carried weight because of his position and his long history with the family, but they also served to highlight how public this disagreement had become. Several other notable guests had moved closer, ostensibly to pay their respects, but actually to get a better view of the unfolding drama. The children's choir director, Mrs. Hawthorne approached Mrs. Pemberton with obvious concern. "Excuse me, but the children are asking when they can begin their performance. Some of the younger ones are getting quite nervous about the delay." Pemberton looked helplessly between the arguing royal women and the waiting performers. Her professional reputation depended on these events running smoothly, and she could see everything falling apart before her eyes. The media representatives were becoming increasingly interested in the developing story, and she knew that negative publicity could damage not only the royal family's image, but also the charitable cause they were meant to be supporting. Camilla seemed to realize that her initial approach wasn't working and decided to try a different strategy. Instead of continuing to argue about protocol and hierarchy, she shifted to what appeared to be concern for Louis's well-being. "Catherine, dear, you look absolutely exhausted," she said with what seemed like genuine sympathy. "You've been carrying Louis around for over an hour now, and I can see that your arms must be getting tired. Let me help you by taking him for just a few minutes so you can rest." It was a clever tactical shift because it reframed her desire to hold Louis as an act of kindness rather than a power play. However, Catherine wasn't fooled by the change in approach. She had learned to read between the lines of royal communications, and she understood that this was simply another way of achieving the same goal. "Thank you for your concern," Catherine replied with icy politeness, "but I'm perfectly capable of caring for my own son. If I need assistance, I'll ask for it." The directness of her refusal sent a ripple of shock through the assembled group. Royal family members were expected to maintain harmony in public, even when they disagreed privately. Catherine's open defiance of Camilla's wishes represented a significant breach of the unwritten rules that governed these interactions. Commander Harrison made another subtle signal to his team, and several additional protection officers began moving into position around the perimeter of the group. Their presence was discreet, but noticeable to anyone trained to look for such things. The head of the palace press office, James Whitmore, had been monitoring the situation from across the pavilion and realized that immediate action was needed to prevent this from becoming a public relations disaster. He began making his way through the crowd, mentally composing damage control statements and trying to figure out how to minimize the fallout from whatever was about to happen. Young Louis had stopped whimpering but remained fussy, reaching out toward the colorful banners and decorations that surrounded the event space. His natural curiosity and innocent energy provided a stark contrast to the adult power struggle being waged around him. "You know, Catherine," Camilla continued, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge despite her attempt to maintain a caring tone, "sometimes being a good mother means knowing when to accept help from more experienced family members. There's no shame in admitting that you might need assistance." The suggestion that Catherine didn't know how to properly care for her own child was the final straw. All of her diplomatic training and years of public service couldn't override the fundamental maternal instinct to protect her baby from anyone who seemed to pose a threat. "I would never put my child in a situation where I felt he wasn't safe and secure," Catherine replied, her meaning crystal clear to everyone within earshot. The implication that she didn't consider Camilla a safe person to hold Louis was unmistakable, and it sent another wave of shocked silence through the gathered crowd. Several guests exchanged meaningful glances, and the photographers became even more focused on capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Pemberton finally decided that she had to intervene, regardless of protocol. "Your Royal Highnesses, the children's choir has been waiting for quite some time, and I'm concerned that we're falling significantly behind schedule. Perhaps we could resolve this matter after the formal presentations." Her suggestion was practical and reasonable, but it also highlighted how far the situation had deteriorated. A professional event coordinator felt compelled to insert herself into a royal family dispute because the alternative was allowing the entire charity event to collapse into chaos. Camilla looked around the pavilion and seemed to suddenly realize how many people were watching their exchange. The gathering included major donors, charity representatives, media personnel, and dozens of other influential figures who would undoubtedly share their observations with others. However, instead of backing down gracefully, she appeared to double down on her position. "Catherine, I'm not asking you anymore. As the Queen Consort and as a senior member of this family, I'm telling you to hand over the child so we can proceed with this event in an appropriate manner." The transformation from request to demand marked a decisive escalation in the conflict. Catherine felt her heart rate increase as she realized that this was no longer just a disagreement about childcare arrangements. This had become a fundamental test of authority within the royal family. with her son serving as the symbolic prize in a power struggle she had never wanted to join. Commander Harrison knew that the situation had moved beyond the point where diplomatic intervention could resolve it peacefully. His team was now positioned to respond to whatever might happen next, though he hoped desperately that it wouldn't come to physical intervention in a dispute between two members of the royal family. The afternoon sun continued to shine brightly over the charity event, but the atmosphere had become charged with tension that threatened to explode into something that could damage the royal family's reputation for generations to come. The moment Camilla's words shifted from request to demand, the entire atmosphere of the charity event changed. Catherine felt as though time had slowed down as she processed what had just happened. Never in her 5 years as a member of the royal family had anyone spoken to her with such direct authority regarding her role as a mother. "I beg your pardon?" Catherine responded, her voice carrying a dangerous quiet that those who knew her well recognized as a warning sign. Lady Margaret instinctively took a half-step closer to her friend, while Commander Harrison's team tightened their protective formation around the group. Camilla seemed to realize she might have overplayed her hand, but instead of retreating, she pressed forward with even greater determination. "Catherine, you're causing a scene and embarrassing the family. The proper thing to do is to hand Louis to me so we can proceed with dignity." The accusation that she was the one causing embarrassment struck Catherine like a physical blow. She had spent years carefully cultivating her public image, working tirelessly for various charities, and conducting herself with the grace and dignity expected of a princess. To be publicly criticized in this way, especially regarding her competence as a mother, felt like a profound betrayal. "The only embarrassment here," Catherine replied, her voice barely controlled, "is someone attempting to forcibly remove a child from his mother's arms at a charity event dedicated to protecting children's welfare." Her words carried across the pavilion with crystal clarity, and several guests audibly gasped at the directness of her response. The photographers had moved into prime positions, their cameras clicking rapidly as they captured what was clearly becoming a historic confrontation. Prince Louis, sensing the heightened tension in his mother's body, began to cry softly. The sound of his distress seemed to galvanize Catherine's resolve even further. She adjusted her hold on him, ensuring that he was secure against her chest, while also positioning herself to better protect him from any unwanted interference. "Now look what you've done," Camilla said, gesturing toward the crying baby. "Your stubbornness has upset the child. If you simply let me take him, I can calm him down and we can all move forward." Mrs. Pemberton watched in horror as the situation continued to deteriorate. The children's choir had now been waiting for over 20 minutes, and several of the younger performers were beginning to lose their composure. The charity representatives looked increasingly uncomfortable, and she could see members of the media beginning to whisper excitedly among themselves. Lord Ashworth made another attempt to mediate. "Ladies, perhaps we could—" "This is a family matter, Charles," Camilla interrupted sharply, not bothering to look in his direction. Her focus remained entirely fixed on Catherine and Louis, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Commander Harrison had been monitoring radio communications with his team, and knew that word of the confrontation was already spreading throughout the palace security network. Protocol demanded that senior officials be notified immediately of any situation that could potentially compromise the royal family's safety or reputation. "Your Royal Highness," he addressed Camilla directly, his voice respectful but firm, "I must ask you to consider the security implications of this situation. We have multiple media representatives present, and this incident is already attracting unwanted attention." For a moment, it seemed as though his intervention might provide the circuit breaker needed to diffuse the tension. Camilla looked around the pavilion and appeared to genuinely notice for the first time how many people were watching their exchange with rapt attention. However, instead of backing down, she seemed to interpret the commander's words as support for her position. "Exactly my point," she said triumphantly. "Catherine's behavior is creating a security risk and embarrassing the family in front of important guests and media representatives." Catherine felt a surge of anger that she struggled to contain. "My behavior? I'm holding my own child at a charity event. How exactly is that inappropriate or embarrassing? Because you're defying the reasonable requests of a senior family member and creating unnecessary drama." Camilla shot back. "This is exactly the kind of selfishness that undermines the institution we all serve." The word selfishness hit Catherine like a slap. She had dedicated the last 5 years of her life to royal service, often at the expense of her personal desires and privacy. To be accused of selfishness for wanting to hold her own baby felt like the ultimate injustice. Selfishness? Catherine repeated, her voice rising slightly for the first time. Wanting to care for my own child is selfish. Lady Margaret could see that her friend was approaching her breaking point, and decided to take a more direct approach. Your Majesty, she addressed Camilla formally. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private, after the charitable presentations have concluded. This needs to be resolved now, before we proceed. Catherine needs to understand that royal protocol takes precedence over personal preferences. Hawthorne, the choir director, approached Mrs. Pemberton again with obvious desperation. The children are becoming quite restless, and some of the parents are starting to ask questions about the delay. Should we perhaps postpone the performance? The suggestion that the carefully planned charity event might need to be postponed because of a royal family dispute sent Mrs. Pemberton into a near panic. No, absolutely not. We have major donors here, media coverage arranged, and charitable commitments that must be fulfilled. She turned toward the arguing women with more boldness than she had ever shown in her professional career. Your Royal Highnesses, I must insist that we proceed with the scheduled program. The children have been practicing for weeks, and the charitable cause cannot suffer because of administrative disagreements. Her diplomatic phrasing of administrative disagreements would have been amusing under other circumstances, but no one was in the mood to appreciate the absurdity of the situation. James Whitmore, the palace press secretary, had finally made his way through the crowd and now stood at the edge of the confrontation. His years of experience in crisis management told him that this situation was rapidly approaching the point of no return. If it escalated much further, no amount of spin or damage control would be able to minimize the negative publicity. Your Royal Highnesses, he interjected as diplomatically as possible, perhaps we could arrange for a brief intermission to allow for private discussion while the technical crew makes final preparations for the presentations? It was a face-saving solution that would allow both women to step back from their public confrontation without appearing to surrender their positions. However, Camilla seemed beyond such diplomatic considerations. There's nothing to discuss privately, she declared. This is very simple. Catherine needs to hand over the child so we can proceed with proper protocol, and she's refusing to do so out of misplaced stubbornness. Catherine felt something snap inside her. The combination of public humiliation, accusations of incompetence as a mother, and the implied threat to her child had pushed her beyond the limits of royal diplomatic training. I am not handing my baby to anyone who doesn't respect my authority as his mother, she stated clearly and loudly enough for everyone in the immediate area to hear. And I certainly won't be bullied into doing so at a charity event meant to protect children. The use of the word bullied sent another shockwave through the assembled crowd. Royal family members were expected to maintain the fiction of perfect harmony, even during private disagreements. Catherine's public accusation that Camilla was engaging in bullying behavior represented a complete breakdown of that carefully maintained facade. Camilla's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. How dare you use such language about a senior member of this family? Your behavior is completely inappropriate and shows a fundamental lack of understanding about royal duty and respect. My duty, Catherine replied with steel in her voice, is first and foremost to protect my child. Everything else is secondary to that responsibility. Commander Harrison realized that the situation had moved beyond verbal confrontation and was approaching something that might require physical intervention. His team was positioned to respond, but the idea of royal protection officers having to physically separate two members of the royal family represented a nightmare scenario that could damage the monarchy's reputation for decades. Young Prince Louis continued to fuss in his mother's arms, picking up on the tension and stress that surrounded him. His innocent discomfort served as a constant reminder of what was really at stake in this power struggle between two strong-willed women. The charity event that had begun as a celebration of childhood welfare and family support had transformed into something that threatened to expose the deepest tensions within the royal family itself. And as the confrontation continued to escalate, it became clear that whatever happened next would have consequences far beyond this single afternoon at Avalon Palace. The tension in the pavilion had reached a breaking point. Camilla, her face now red with frustration and public embarrassment, took a decisive step forward and reached directly for Prince Louis. "Enough of this nonsense, Catherine. Give me the child now." Catherine's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive as she saw Camilla's hands approaching her son. Without thinking, she turned her body to shield Louis while taking several steps backward. "Don't you dare touch him!" The sharp command rang out across the charity event, causing conversations to halt abruptly throughout the pavilion. Even the children's choir fell silent as Mrs. Hawthorne quickly moved to position herself between them and the unfolding drama. Commander Harrison knew that this was the moment he had been dreading. Royal protocol strictly forbade physical contact between family members during public disagreements, and he could see that the situation was about to cross that line. "Security positions now," he spoke quietly into his radio, and within seconds, his team had formed a protective barrier around both women. "Stand down," Camilla ordered, turning her attention to the security team. "This is a family matter, and you have no authority to interfere with my interactions with family members." "With respect, Your Majesty," Commander Harrison replied firmly. "My primary responsibility is the safety and security of all royal family members, including Prince Louis. This situation has become volatile, and I must act to protect everyone involved." The public contradiction of Camilla's authority by the head of security sent another ripple of shock through the assembled guests. Royal protection officers were trained to be invisible and diplomatic, never openly challenging royal commands unless lives were at stake. Catherine felt a surge of gratitude toward Commander Harrison, but she also understood that his intervention had escalated the situation beyond anything that could be easily explained away. The presence of uniformed security officers forming a protective barrier between two members of the royal family would be impossible to hide from the media representatives present. Mrs. Pemberton watched in horror as her carefully planned charity event disintegrated before her eyes. The photographers were having a field day, capturing images that would undoubtedly make headlines around the world. She could already imagine the devastating impact this would have on the charitable cause they were meant to be supporting. Lady Margaret moved closer to Catherine, offering both moral and physical support. "Catherine, darling, perhaps we should take Louis somewhere quiet where he can rest. He's clearly becoming upset by all the commotion." It was a diplomatic suggestion that offered Catherine a graceful exit from the confrontation, but Camilla immediately moved to block such a retreat. "No one is going anywhere until this matter is resolved," Camilla declared. "Catherine has publicly defied senior royal authority and must acknowledge her error before we can proceed." The demand for a public acknowledgement of error struck Catherine as the ultimate humiliation. Not only was Camilla trying to take her child, but she was also demanding that Catherine publicly admit wrongdoing for protecting him. The only error here, Catherine replied with quiet dignity, was allowing this confrontation to happen in public. "But I will not apologize for protecting my child from anyone, regardless of their position in this family." Lord Ashworth, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the entire situation, decided to make one final attempt at mediation. "Ladies, surely we can find a compromise that respects everyone's concerns. Perhaps." "There is no compromise when it comes to my child's well-being," Catherine interrupted, her voice carrying a finality that made it clear she would not negotiate further. James Whitmore had been frantically texting with his staff, trying to coordinate a response strategy that could minimize the damage from this very public confrontation. However, he was beginning to realize that the situation had moved beyond the realm of public relations management into something that could fundamentally alter the royal family's public image. Prince William, Catherine's husband, had been attending a separate engagement across the city when he received an urgent call from the palace. The message was brief but alarming. There was a situation at the charity event that required his immediate attention. He was now en route to the palace, but traffic and security protocols meant he wouldn't arrive for at least 30 minutes. Young Prince Louis had stopped crying but remained visibly unsettled in his mother's arms. His wide blue eyes seemed to take in the tension surrounding him, and he clung more tightly to Catherine's dress. The sight of the distressed baby served as a constant reminder of the human cost of the adult power struggle. The children's choir, which had been waiting patiently for over 40 minutes, was finally dismissed by Mrs. Hawthorne. Several of the younger performers were in tears, disappointed that they wouldn't be able to perform the songs they had practiced so diligently. Their parents watched the royal drama with a mixture of fascination and disapproval. Camilla seemed to realize that her initial strategy had failed completely, but instead of backing down, she decided to escalate further. "Catherine, your behavior today has shown a fundamental lack of respect for the institution we all serve. This is not just about one afternoon or one child. This is about whether you understand your place in this family." The reference to understanding her place was the kind of coded language that carried deep meaning within royal circles. Catherine understood perfectly well that this was no longer about Louis, or even about protocol. This was about establishing dominance and ensuring that she understood who held ultimate authority within the family hierarchy. "My place," Catherine replied with ice-cold precision, "is as Louis's mother first and foremost. Everything else, including royal protocol, comes second to that responsibility." The direct prioritization of maternal duty over royal obligation represented a revolutionary statement within the context of royal family dynamics. For centuries, royal parents had been expected to subordinate personal family relationships to institutional requirements. Commander Harrison could see that neither woman was prepared to back down, and he made the difficult decision to take more direct action. "Your Royal Highnesses, I'm going to have to ask that this conversation be continued in a more private setting. The current situation poses security risks that I cannot ignore." "Are you ordering us to leave?" Camilla asked incredulously. "I'm respectfully requesting that we move this discussion away from public view and media attention," he replied diplomatically, though his tone made it clear that this was not really a request. Catherine realized that Commander Harrison was offering her the exit strategy she needed. "I think that's an excellent suggestion," she said quickly. "Louis needs to be fed and changed, and this environment is clearly too stimulating for him." She began to move toward the pavilion exit, but Camilla stepped directly into her path. "We are not finished with this conversation, Catherine. You cannot simply walk away when confronted with your responsibilities to this family." The physical blocking of Catherine's path represented a clear escalation that Commander Harrison could not ignore. "Your Majesty, I must ask you to step aside and allow Princess Catherine and Prince Louis to pass." For a moment, it seemed as though Camilla might refuse even this direct request from the head of security. The entire pavilion fell silent as guests and staff watched to see whether the Queen Consort would comply with security directives. The standoff lasted only seconds, but they felt like hours to everyone involved. Finally, with obvious reluctance, Camilla moved slightly to one side, though she maintained her position close enough to make Catherine's exit feel like a retreat under pressure. As Catherine walked past her, with Louis still securely in her arms, Camilla spoke just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This isn't over, Catherine. There will be consequences for this behavior." The barely veiled threat sent a chill through the assembled crowd, and made it clear that the confrontation at the charity event was just the beginning of what promised to be a much larger conflict within the royal family. Catherine continued walking toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster, but she could feel the eyes of dozens of people following her every step. The photographers continued clicking away, capturing images that would soon be transmitted around the world. As she reached the edge of the pavilion, she could hear Mrs. Pemberton attempting to salvage what remained of the charity event by announcing that the formal presentations would proceed despite the slight delay. However, the damage was done. What should have been a celebration of charitable giving and family values had become a public spectacle that exposed the deep fractures within the royal family itself. Prince Louis seemed to sense that they were moving away from the source of tension and began to settle down in his mother's arms. His peaceful expression provided a stark contrast to the chaos they were leaving behind and reminded Catherine of what was truly important in this entire situation. The drive back to their private residence would give Catherine time to process what had just happened and prepare for the storm of publicity and family conflict that was sure to follow. But for now, she focused on the weight of her son in her arms and the knowledge that she had done everything in her power to protect him. The drive back to Kensington Palace passed in relative silence, broken only by the soft sounds of Prince Louis finally settling into a peaceful sleep in his car seat. Catherine stared out the window at the familiar London streets, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred at the charity event. Lady Margaret sat beside her, occasionally reaching over to offer silent comfort through gentle touches on her arm. Commander Harrison, riding in the front seat, was already coordinating with palace communications staff through his earpiece. The conversation that Catherine could overhear consisted of tense, clipped sentences about media management, damage control, and family briefings. She knew that by the time they reached the palace, the entire incident would have been analyzed, discussed, and strategized by teams of advisors and communications experts. The car's secure phone rang, and Commander Harrison handed it back to Catherine after a brief exchange with the caller. "Your Royal Highness, it's Prince William." Catherine's heart leaped with relief at hearing her husband's voice, though she could immediately detect the strain and concern in his tone. "Catherine, are you all right? I heard there was some kind of incident at the charity event." "We're fine," she replied, glancing down at their sleeping son. "Louis and I are both safe, but there was a confrontation with Camilla about her wanting to hold him during the ceremony." The pause on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Catherine began to worry the connection had been lost. When William finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had rarely heard before. "How bad was it?" "I'm getting reports that security had to intervene." "It was public, William." "Very public. There were photographers, donors, charity representatives, dozens of witnesses. Camilla accused me of embarrassing the family and demanded that I hand Louis over to her. When I refused, she tried to physically take him from me." Another long pause. "She tried to physically take him?" Commander Harrison stepped in before it got that far, but yes, she was reaching for Louis, and I had to turn away to protect him. It was. Catherine struggled to find words that could adequately describe the humiliation and fear she had felt. "It was horrible, William. She treated me like an incompetent child who didn't know how to care for her own baby." "I'm 20 minutes out," William said, his voice now carrying an edge of anger that Catherine had seldom heard. "Don't talk to anyone else until I get there. No statements, no interviews, no explanations to staff. We'll handle this together." The call ended, leaving Catherine feeling both relieved and apprehensive. She knew that William would support her completely, but she also understood that this incident would force him to choose between protecting his wife and child and maintaining peace within the extended royal family. By the time they arrived at Kensington Palace, word of the confrontation had already spread throughout the royal household staff. Catherine could see it in the careful expressions of the servants who greeted them, and in the way conversations seemed to halt abruptly when she entered rooms. Thompson, Louis's nanny, was waiting in the nursery with obvious concern. "Your Royal Highness, is everything all right? We received word that there had been some kind of disturbance at the charity event." "We're fine, Mrs. Thompson," Catherine replied as she gently transferred the still-sleeping Louis to his crib. "It was just a disagreement about protocol. Nothing that affected Louis directly." But even as she said the words, Catherine knew they weren't entirely true. The confrontation had affected Louis, perhaps more than she wanted to admit. He had sensed the tension and stress, becoming fussy and upset in a way that was unusual for his typically calm disposition. Lady Margaret excused herself to make some private phone calls, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts for the first time since the incident began. She found herself replaying every moment of the confrontation, wondering if she could have handled things differently while simultaneously feeling certain that she had made the right choices in protecting her son. The palace communications office was already in crisis mode. James Whitmore had returned from the charity event to find his staff assembled in emergency session, monitoring news websites and social media platforms for early coverage of the incident. The initial reports were already appearing on royal watching websites with headlines like "Royal Family Drama at Charity Event" and "Tension Between Princess and Queen Consort Goes Public." "How bad is the photographic evidence?" Whitmore asked his deputy. "Comprehensive," came the grim reply. "Multiple angles, clear shots of the confrontation, security intervention, everything. The photographers couldn't have asked for better material if we had staged it for them." Whitmore rubbed his temples as he contemplated the magnitude of the public relations nightmare ahead of them. Royal family disputes were supposed to remain private, handled through discreet channels and diplomatic conversations. Public confrontations, especially ones involving young children, and security interventions, represented the kind of scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation for years. At Clarence's house, Camilla was dealing with her own aftermath from the incident. Her private secretary, Robert Mitchell, had returned with her from the charity event and was now attempting to craft a response strategy that could justify her actions while minimizing the damage to her own reputation. "Your Majesty," Mitchell said carefully, "the early media reports are focusing on the security intervention and the apparent tension between you and Princess Catherine. How would you like to respond to inquiries about what happened?" Camilla, still angry about the public embarrassment she had suffered, was in no mood for diplomatic responses. Catherine behaved like a spoiled child, refusing to follow basic royal protocol and embarrassing the entire family in front of important guests and media. If anyone should be explaining their behavior, it's her. Mitchell winced at the directness of her response. While he personally agreed that Catherine's defiance had been inappropriate, he also understood that any public criticism of a young mother protecting her baby would likely backfire spectacularly in terms of public opinion. "Perhaps," he suggested delicately, "we could frame this as a misunderstanding about ceremonial arrangements rather than a confrontation about childcare. The public tends to be very sympathetic to maternal protective instincts." "I don't care what the public thinks," Camilla replied sharply. "This is about maintaining proper order within the royal family, and Catherine needs to understand that her personal preferences don't override institutional requirements." Meanwhile, Prince William's car was racing through London traffic as he tried to reach his family. His personal protection officer had briefed him on the security aspects of the incident, but the family dynamics were what concerned him most. He knew that Catherine would be devastated by the public nature of the confrontation, and he was already formulating plans for how to support her while addressing the broader family implications. His phone rang constantly during the drive, with calls from palace officials, family members, and advisors all wanting to discuss the incident and its potential consequences. However, William ignored most of these calls, focusing instead on getting home to his wife and child. When he finally arrived at Kensington Palace, William went straight to the nursery, where he found Catherine sitting quietly beside Louis's crib, watching their son sleep. The sight of her obvious distress and exhaustion made his anger toward Camilla spike even higher. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, taking her into his arms. "I keep thinking about all those children who were supposed to perform today," Catherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "They had been practicing for weeks, and their parents brought them to what should have been a celebration of charitable giving. Instead, they got to witness a royal family meltdown." William held her tighter, understanding that her distress was about more than just the confrontation with Camilla. Catherine took her charitable work seriously and hated the idea that her personal conflicts might have damaged causes she cared deeply about. "This isn't your fault," William said firmly. "You were protecting our son from someone who was trying to undermine your authority as his mother. Any parent would have done the same thing." "But I'm not just any parent," Catherine replied sadly. "I'm supposed to maintain dignity and diplomacy even in impossible situations. The public expects better from us." As evening fell over London, the full impact of the day's events was becoming clear. News outlets around the world were picking up the story, with headlines ranging from sympathetic, "Princess protects baby from family pressure," to sensational, "Royal family civil war erupts in public." Social media was exploding with commentary, much of it supportive of Catherine's position as a protective mother, but some criticizing her for breaking royal protocol and embarrassing the family. The incident had touched on fundamental questions about parental rights, family authority, and the role of tradition in modern royal life. King Charles, who had been attending a state function in Scotland, was briefed on the situation and immediately arranged to return to London the following day. Palace sources indicated that he was deeply concerned about the public nature of the family dispute and wanted to meet with all parties involved to find a resolution. As Catherine finally settled into bed that night, with Louis sleeping peacefully in the nursery next door and William beside her offering comfort and support, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the space of a single afternoon. The confrontation with Camilla had forced her to choose between royal diplomacy and maternal protection, and she had chosen her child without hesitation. Whatever consequences followed from that choice, Catherine knew she would face them with the knowledge that she had done everything in her power to protect the most important person in her world. The future of royal family relationships remained uncertain, but her commitment to Louis's well-being was absolute and unshakable. The charity event that had begun as a celebration of family values had ended by testing those values in the most public and dramatic way possible, and while the immediate crisis was over, the ripple effects of that afternoon would continue to influence royal family dynamics for years to come.